Welcome to the Flower Lounge, a place for conversations with wildly creative people and a little plant-loving wisdom to help you experience life in full bloom. I'm Katie Hess, flower alchemist and founder of LOTUSWEI, and I believe in a world where we're all living at our personal edge. Welcome to this week's episode of the Flower Lounge. I'm super excited to have this guest. I think you'll agree this is going to be an amazing conversation. Maia Toll spent a life-changing year apprenticed to a traditional medicine woman in Ireland. She mentors spiritual wellness seekers, practitioners, and teachers through her online program, The Medicine Keepers Collective, and she's the founder and owner of Herbiary, a natural products store with locations in Asheville, North Carolina, and Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. How cool is that? I need to ask you about that. Maia has taught botanical medicine at Westchester University and the Amazon Center for Environmental Education and Research in the Peruvian jungle. She lectures at hospitals, universities, and herbal conferences, and runs her own deep magic retreat in the North Carolina mountains. I want to come. It sounds so amazing. And she blogs to an international following at maiatoll.com. And I'm going to spell her first name. It's Maia and last name Toll.com. She lives in Asheville, North Carolina. Thank you so much for being with us, Maia.
I am so excited to be here.
Okay, so we normally start with an exercise. If you want to just close your eyes and go back to a time in your childhood when you played around flowers or plants or trees, and just think about what you were doing, who you were with, what you were up to. See if you can identify a favorite flower or botanical, and then reflect on the 3 words you would use to describe its personality. And then whenever you're ready, you can share what you're thinking, what you're up to, your favorite, and the 3 words.
Okay. So I'm thinking about this line of willow trees that ran along the back of my parents' property when I was growing up. And all the other kids were fairly athletic and I was not. So I'd go and I'd hide under the willow trees whenever touch football or kick the can or any of those things started happening. I spent a lot of time under those willow trees. And I'd say 3 words: safe, graceful, rooted.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah.
Totally sounds like the conversation we had before we pressed record, which I'm excited to get back into. Okay, so we typically find that the 3 words would actually describe the way that you bring your greatest gifts into the world. So safe, or making people feel safe, and graceful, and rooted.
I think that actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah. One of the things that I have always tried to be, and I think more I was born to it and then buffed it up, is I try to be the person that stands on the bridge between the mystical and the mundane. The person who can kind of turn towards the mundane and say, hey, there's something wonderful over here, and it's actually not all that scary. Come on, let me show you. And then can turn towards the mystical and say, let's ground this, let's root this, and make it something that's approachable and that people can connect with, even if they weren't born clairvoyant or clairsentient. Because I think that there's a side to the mystical that everyone can touch. But people who were born naturally seeing or hearing, I think it's actually the clairvoyance and the clairaudience who intimidate the rest of us, right? Because every time they talk to a plant, they see some beautiful lady in a flowing dress singing a song, and the rest of us are like, what are you talking about? So finding a place to bridge the mystery and the magic with everyday life, and usually it's just changing the language, just finding the words that other people can relate to.
Yeah, let's talk about the elements, because we touched a little bit about that before we hit record, and you were talking about people in your circle being really comfortable with certain elements and not so comfortable with other elements. Tell us more what that means.
Yeah, so Okay, so I work on a 4-element system, and oftentimes I think of the 5th element as either soul or self, and that's at the center of the circle. But around the edge of the circle are the classic Greek 4 elements: earth, air, water, fire. Each of those elements has a personality. And I find that women who are drawn to mystery, magic, herbalism, Reiki, like we can keep going, flower essences, often are really easy with the water element, which is emotion. They are comfortable talking emotion. They're comfortable being in emotion. They're comfortable working with each other through their emotions. A lot of times they're comfortable with fire. Fire is that passion, that creative spark. A lot of them are very comfortable with like the phoenix imagery of that giant explosion of fire, of passion, of creativity that burns itself to dust and then gets recreated again. So that's like a really common motif that I find women in this world are drawn to. And then you have a segment that are super comfortable with air. Those are your communicators. Those are your, I'm going to go to the library and research this, right? Your intellectuals who sometimes have some trouble stepping into water. They have trouble with the emotions, but they've got the air piece. Where I find that women have trouble is earth. And this is interesting because oftentimes they're good with like actual earth. They're gardeners. They make medicine. And so in their minds, they're like, oh yeah, I'm good with earth. But they're not good with metaphoric earth. And metaphoric earth is this idea that we live in a body. We're not here to escape it. We're not here to spend our time in journeys, in dream states. We're here to live in a skin. And we're here to live amongst other people living in a skin, in communities that, have to get things done. So it's really easy to fall into the pattern of, I'm going to set the energy, I'm going to set the intention, I'm going to put fire behind this, I'm going to put water behind this, even air. But then eventually, you actually have to put earth behind it. Setting the intention of having a house doesn't replace either going out and building the dang thing or finding a realtor and trumping through 50 of them till you find the one you want.
Right.
At a certain point, you have to put your body on the physical plane and get involved. And that's where I feel like women sometimes have a hard time being grounded and rooted, and not trying to escape.
Let's talk about escapism.
Let's. Do you see that a lot? I feel like flower essences actually lend themselves a little bit to the more watery, right? Because they're water-based.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard for me to say. I think that in my experience, flower essences help people see what's real and authentic. It's interesting because now that we're talking about it, I feel like it could be of use. It could be very helpful in terms of bringing out the earth, because what I see is it makes us strip our pretenses. It makes us like get really like, where's the grit? Where am I screwing up? Or how am I contributing to this? Or what's real and raw? Like, what's really going on? Kind of thing. That is like that authenticity of just like hitting the bottom and then being able to speak from there, which I would almost equate to earth. It's like, let's just put our feet on the earth and talk about what's real. Does that feel?
Yes. And what I'm wondering is, listening to you, if you're finding that like people come in kind of in the watery emotional, right?
For sure. Or
attracted to the watery, okay, and attracted to the air. And then the flower essences help them connect to the earth.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's like the earth juice, right? So it's like tuning our radio station to the earth.
I love that. A new name for your podcast, Earth Juice. Yeah.
And I think that's the antithesis of escapism. It's like, I love flower essences because they're so gentle, but they're also like, they just don't let us, in their like really soft and gentle, beautiful way. They're also like freaking goddamn relentless. Like they are just not gonna let us escape.
Yeah.
Right? Eventually, like we're gonna have to see what's
I feel like all the plants are like that.
right.
Like however you encounter the plants, there's this, you know, okay, yeah, my branches are in the sky, but my roots are in the earth, and you need to get real. Like, come on down, anchor it.
Right. We can't actually make changes unless we see what's there. Like we like you were talking about building a house, you know, like we can't actually build something if we don't know what kind of foundation we're on.
Right. Yeah.
Where do you see escapism happening? How is it manifesting in the communities that you run in? And yeah, what do you personally do not to slip into escapism? I know that's like a lot of questions at once. Take it where you want to take it.
I see it in a lot of different ways. I think first off, like right out of the gate, I see it in reading material. You know, everyone is really drawn to fantasy, science fiction, romantic histories. So it's this desire to step out of, and like, I get it. I'm right there with you. When life gives me a rough time, I am, all for escapism reading. But what I do see sometimes is that getting translated into real life. Like I'm going to try to achieve what I'm rereading The Mists of Avalon, what Morgaine in The Mists of Avalon, like how she was in this time, in this real world, I'm going to be her, and I see some of that transference of, I'm going to take this character from a novel, from fiction, but I'm going to try to live it in real life. And I think that starts to get a little murky on a lot of different levels, like not just the ungrounded level, but the, who are you? Like you're losing yourself in this mask of someone else. So I see that. I see it in I see it in that place. I also see it in the coping mechanisms for when life gets rough. When life gets rough, we're going to send energy. We're going to light a candle. We're going to go do a journey. All those things are fabulous. Pull out your cards, do a journey, and then see what real world action you're being directed to and go do that. Like that's, pulling out your cards, doing a shamanic journey, that's the beginning step. Working the energy is the beginning step. After you work the energy, you have to pull it into the reality and, create something on a real physical level. The other place I see it is people getting stuck in their heads. And these are a lot of your air types. I often tell the story of when I was studying herbalism, there was a woman in my program. We're 2 years into an advanced herbal training. She's never made a tincture. She has never made any kind of plant medicine 2 years in. So she's got all this information in her head, but she's scared to actualize it into something physical. And I think it's a great metaphor for what can happen when we're so focused on the energy or so focused on the knowledge, and we don't pull, I think of the energy as your heart, the knowledge is your head, but then you've got to pull it down into your hands. You've got to keep your hands, your heart, and your head in balance. Otherwise, you're actually not doing the work. You just think you are.
Right. It's like just because you're thinking about it, you're doing it, but you're actually not, right?
Yeah.
So how does embodiment play into that?
For me personally, I tend to run my energy through my body, like to the point where it's a detriment. Everything comes in, it affects my physical self. I get sick, things get out of balance. So I've had to work almost to temper that a little bit. And we often, I think, are playing in the energies that we're like working with other people. So I'm the extreme of embodiment and I'm often working with people who are the extreme of disembodiment. So finding that balance between feeling everything in your cells instead of just thinking about it or feeling the energy of it and letting it go, right? I think that we can learn from the way we work with energy to allow things to come into our body, like actually feel them on a cellular level, and then let them go. One of the things that I used to do when I would see clients as an herbalist is I would consciously try to embody what they were embodying. So if I was sitting with someone, I would begin to put my body into the same shapes and positions their body was in, and align so that I was kind of a mirror for them, and then ask my body what it was feeling when it was in those shapes and in those positions. And usually I could tune into whatever it was that had brought them into the office in the first place. I could feel their pain, feel their discomfort, feel where things weren't flowing smoothly. When I first started practicing, I thought that I was like, woohoo, I can do it. Like, aren't I so cool? And then for a week, I'd have whatever they had. And it took me a while to realize that, it's kind of like a snapshot. If you're embodying what someone else is embodying, you take it like a picture and then you let it go. You don't kind of be like, oh, let me grab that from you. I need some of that, and hold on to it. So that was a big lesson. And I think, all of this is a little bit of a roundabout way of getting to this, what is embodiment? I think that it's complex. And for me, I have learned about embodiment through feeling the world inside my body instead of merely thinking about it in my head or letting the energy kind of just swirl around me amorphously. But that kind of embodiment is in and of itself a skill set, so that you don't end up physically taking on the weight of the world, which I think a lot of people do. I think that when we see a lot of disease states where people are physically taking on, what's going on in the outer environment. So how's that for a long and roundabout answer? How do you see embodiment? Like, what does, when we talk about being embodied and not kind of like being off in outer space, what does it mean for you?
To me, it means I am aware. So, I would say most of us are in our minds. Most of us are thinking about things. And it takes a real sense of dedication and devotion to remind ourselves to come back into a pure awareness state, which is like how my body feels, if I hear the birds singing, what's the temperature today, how am I breathing, how am I carrying myself. Like when I hear you say embodiment, I think like literally just the simplicity of being aware of my own body and the surroundings. And that's like a method to disengage or unhook our awareness from our thinking mind. That is so, so rare. And so few people are practicing it just because, simply haven't had access to it and or understand that the results can be so powerful.
Yeah.
I think that it's very easy to get swept up into story and drama and emotion if we're not aware of how my body feels. Do I have any tension in my shoulders? How am I breathing? What does my belly feel like? Just that simple awareness of what it feels like to be in our own bodies.
Yeah. And I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about like different ways that I've gone through learning to be embodied. It's a process, right? Like anything else. And the first step before you're actually able to do it is you're thinking about being embodied. So you're thinking about, what does my body feel like, right? Your brain's saying, oh, well, I think there's some tension here, but you're not actually in the tension between your shoulder blades. You're still in your brain. So in some ways, it's almost like, where is your energy? And if the energy is zipping around in your brain, even if you are thinking about your body, you're still in your brain. So how do you take that energy, almost like if you can picture it like a light, and move it out of your head and into your tongue, your shoulder blades, your finger? And that just takes over and over again, kind of coaxing that little ball of light to move around. And it does. And the first time you do it, you're a little like, whoa, what just happened? Because it's very different from thinking about your breathing or thinking about your tension. Not sure how we teach that.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple as like placing your awareness there. Like if you say like, how does your belly feel right now? Then your awareness immediately goes into your belly, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's just a matter of doing it again and again and again and again, because we like to be these like runaway trains in our minds into the past, into the future. And the cycle, like what breaks that cycle is placing our awareness on something else.
Yeah.
Other than the monkey mind. But we're so used to having it just there all the time.
Yeah. And I think it's something you said, I think actually really helps. Like, not just place your awareness, but I think you said like, oh, how does your belly feel? Place your hands there. I think when we can activate with touch, sometimes it can help us to move that energy. Like we can actually be like, oh, that's where I'm supposed to be feeling. Like right there. Got that. And just really tuning in to the sensation of the touch, and then going deeper to like what else is going on in that little region of the world.
And then I also hear you talking about putting your ideas into action. So like you're literally talking about having a plan and putting it into action, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that there's this beautiful bouncing back and forth that happens between your heart, which is like that energy center that's just, sampling the energy all the time, your head, which is thinking, and your hands and your body, which are doing. And so, at some point you do have to bounce it upstairs to your head and come up with the plan, but then you got to bounce it back down and actually do something, actually move.
Speaking of doing something, you've been very prolific in terms of books lately.
Yes.
You want to talk about that?
Sure. So you got the first book, right? I sent that to you.
I did. It's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. So the first book is called The Illustrated Herbiary, and it's based on the concept of a bestiary, actually. This idea that we can take in information through sight, through our vision, that the illustrations are as important for telling the story, not just for seeing the exact botanical placement of, every petal, but for telling the metaphoric story as the words are. So I've been saying it's kind of magical nonfiction. It's based on fact, and there's hints about the traditional medicinal properties of the plants in there. But it's really meant to hook into that heart energy we were just talking about, more than the mind energy, and to grab people at that place where we're relating to the collective unconscious and story. So I'm super excited. And one of the things that I've been proposing to my publishing house for a bit now is that traditionally there were 3 medicine kingdoms: animal, vegetable, and mineral. And in my programs, we work with all of them. And so, I've been saying, we really should do a 3-book trilogy. And they're like, that's nice, Maia. This book hasn't even been published. And then this book came out, and it's been really kind of amazing to watch it grow its legs and take off into the world. And I think my publishing house has been a little surprised. So they actually came to me just a few weeks ago, and they're like, remember that idea about doing the animal, vegetable, mineral. Can we do animal, and can we kind of do that fast? So I am working on the actual bestiary, because the herbiary was based on a bestiary, but now we'll get a bestiary is the next book. And I'm super excited about that. And that's in process right now. Yeah.
Tell me more about that. So are you going to like feature different animals for different chapters? And what will you?
So it's going to follow the same exact format as the herbiary. So same illustrator, I think. And so it'll be big picture, small write-up that's kind of like an oracle, and then a ritual and a reflection that are more about the energy that animal brings into your life than about, the specifics of the animal. So I've been having a great time with it. And it's been really interesting for me with the herbiary. Every time I sat down to write, I would just say to the plants, well, who wants to come in today? And whoever popped up their hand got into the book. And there were some surprises, like Daisy was insistent that she was going to be in the book. And I was like, no, you're not in this book. And she's like, no, I am in this book. Get writing. And that's been a really important message. So many people have said to me, I needed that Daisy message. I needed Daisy's medicine.
And what is it about the Daisy that people were needing so much?
So Daisy's about being yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. If you look at Daisy, it's kind of funny. We'll all bring daisies into the house. We'll bring bouquets of daisies in with our wildflowers, but she's actually kind of tatty, right? Her leaves are always a little rumpled and her petals are ripped, and she's a little bit of a tomboy, but we all adore her. And what I find interesting with Daisy is she's in a plant family with echinacea, with arnica, with elecampane, with some like heavy hitters in the medicinal realm. And Daisy's, barely used. I think if nothing else is available, people will crush the Daisy as a poultice for bruises. But it's like not even a secondary choice. It's a tertiary choice. So, Daisy is in this family with the heavy hitters, and she herself is not. But she's this lovely presence that we all want to bring in. And so the message from me is be yourself. And you don't have to be the shining star. Just simply being yourself is enough. And I think that women need that.
Mm-hmm.
Women need to hear that they can just show up as them.
Yeah, there's such freedom in that. If I visualize like a meadow full of daisies, it's like freedom. It's just freedom.
Yeah. And like really not caring about what anyone else thinks. When you're in that meadow of daisies, there's no fussiness. There's no, what does my hair look like? It's just.
No, you're like lying on the ground, looking up at the sky, right? Total freedom.
Yeah.
What's an animal that has recently been jumping into your mind?
So I've been doing owls today, which I'm very curious what my editor is going to think when she sees that there are 3 owls in the book. I'm wondering if some of them are going to get the editorial axe, but they all have such different energies. And I love owl because it's been a symbol for so long in kind of our cultural lineage, that it has multiple meanings. And I think the different owls have slightly different energy, and I'm not going to go into it because you have to read the book.
Mm-hmm.
But I am noticing there are a lot of birds in this book. So that's just been interesting. Like, getting a lot of avian energy going on.
Maybe you have to have another volume. Maybe there's a 4-part series.
The same thing happened with the first book. I was like, ooh, I could do a whole book on mushrooms. I could do a whole book on trees. I could, right? Like when you start kind of parsing it out, there's so many ways to do it. So I do think there's some magic in just letting whoever shows up, show up, and not, how do I say, like almost over creating so that everyone can show up, who decides to show their face is interesting to me, and who gets left out. Like with the herbiary, some of the major medicinal plants are not, a lot of the major medicinal plants aren't in there, which wasn't a conscious choice. It's just, when it came time for the hand raising, they weren't raising their hands.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been interesting too, because that allowed some of the lesser known players to show up, which people have been really appreciating. And so I'm kind of thinking like the same thing's going to happen with this next book. If a lot of birds are showing up, it's probably because if we go to what's out there now, the birds are kind of lumped by category. Like owl gets one right up instead of screech owl being different from little owl being different from barn owl. Yeah. So
do you want to do an experiment?
Sure.
Okay. So let's say you were going to do a reading for all the listeners, and say you choose 3 plants and 3 animals, and you just sort of tune in right now to who might raise their hand for this particular conversation. And then you could give us a little reading.
Okay. So hawthorn is definitely coming in, and aspen. Ooh, it's a tree reading. Ooh, and reishi. So that's an interesting combo on the plants. Hawthorn, aspen, and reishi. So hawthorn is a portal. Hawthorns traditionally were where the fairies lived, and they're the door to the other realms. It's also heart medicine. So I like to think of it as your way into yourself. Hawthorn opens that doorway into yourself. I use hawthorn in a way that very few other people do. I use it for homesickness. And I think that homesickness is really when you've become disconnected from your own roots, and you can think of that metaphorically in a lot of different ways, either your roots of place or your roots of self-esteem or your, roots of honesty. But when you're disconnected from your own roots, I think that that's homesickness, and hawthorn really helps with that. So hawthorn is coming in, and aspen, I love aspens. For those of you who don't know aspens grow like at higher elevation, and they're not really big trees, but they have leaves that, I think because of the movement, they're kind of like a silver gray color, but they always look like they kind of glitter. They look like silver to me, and they often are just moving just a little bit.
Shimmery, right?
Yeah, they're kind of shimmery, right? And so in traditional flower essence morphology, aspen is used for fear, fear of the unknown. And I think that's interesting because, when you see that shaking, that movement of the leaves, that quivering, it could be taken as fear. But I think when I think of aspen, I think that little movement, I think it's laughter. I think that aspen is kind of constantly giggling with her sisters. And here's the thing that most people don't know about aspens. They're not individual trees. They're actually giant organisms. They're some of the largest organisms on Earth. Because when you see a grove of aspen trees, that's not like 20 individual trees. That's one organism with 20 outcroppings. And so aspen's medicine, to my mind, is that we're never really alone. That we are at the roots, we're joined. And so, yeah, scary stuff happens. And fear comes in. But if you can remember that we're all one, that we're all joined, that's ultimately what conquers the fear. So the third plant that came in was reishi. And reishi is a mushroom. It's a shelf mushroom. This was a really tough one for the illustrator, Kate O'Hara, to do. And she tried a couple different times, and they look like flying saucers. And and then she was playing with these like I Ching type symbols and like just trying to create something. And so I finally got an email from the head of the graphics department saying like, help, Kate doesn't know what to do with this funky mushroom that you threw into this book. And I immediately pictured the reishi mushroom as like steps up a tree, that those ledges were growing as little steps in a ladder. Traditionally in Taoist medicine, reishi helps you to achieve your highest purpose. So it helps you to transcend and come into your fullest self. So I think it's interesting that, what immediately came in were two trees and then the mushroom that climbs the tree, right? And helps you move from the roots up into the branches.
That's so beautiful. I love that.
Yeah. So why don't we, I feel like we're going to dilute if we get into the animals. We'll talk about the animals next year.
Yeah, let's talk about that. When that book comes out, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had said when we were talking before, you had something was sparking a movie reference. So Kill Bill, the movie I've never seen.
I love that movie, Kill Bill. It's crazy and wild. Yeah, we were talking about emotional fortitude.
Oh, yeah.
And so there's this scene in the movie where this woman goes to study with all of these old kung fu masters in Asia and just gets her butt kicked. And there's like this, if you've seen the movie, like there's this scene where she's just like so physically destroyed from all of these trials and tests and working out that she just can't even lift her chopsticks. Like she's trying to eat the rice out of the bowl with the chopsticks and she just can't even lift the freaking chopsticks. And her teacher is kind of looking at her and seeing how she's dealing with it. And I don't know, I just think about that because it's like the old school way of learning things. Like you put in the time and you were persevering and you worked your ass off no matter what. And you were talking about sort of like the crone medicine. And it reminded me also of some training that I'd done with Jeannie Rose.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know Jeannie?
I have taken a class. I've taken a weekend workshop with Jeannie. She's old school.
Yeah. And she's tough. And like, I remember, I did a lot of like botanical perfumery courses with her, and it was like, she had rules and you had like, there were only a couple rules, but you followed them. Like you wear all white and you write with number 2 pencils. And that was designed for the student, right? To not be distracted, to see clearly. And so that you wouldn't lose your formulas. Because if you used ink, the essential oils you'd lose it forever. And maybe you thought this great thing. And if you used a number 2 pencil, right? So she was actually really trying to help us, but she was super strict. And she'd get on people's cases if they didn't follow her rules. And it just reminded me when we were talking about, I think people today have lost a little bit of emotional fortitude. That sort of thick skin, the toughness of like, somebody getting on my case or scolding me, and how that makes us tough. We've kind of lost that a little bit.
I think that goes back to what we were talking to in the beginning, which is that like that earth energy, right? That kind of like, I am rooted and you're not going to knock me over, even if you howl at me a little bit,
Well, that's what the old teachers were always doing, right? Is toughening you up. It's like the storm coming and then the tree roots getting more rooted in and stronger. Like these types of experiences in life make us courageous versus, make us crumble.
Yes.
We have to get through the crumbling period.
Yes.
To the strength.
Yes. I did this old-fashioned apprenticeship where I lived with my teacher for a year, and people think it sounds so romantic. It was chop wood, carry water. It was like, your fingers are bleeding. That's great. Bandage them up because we're not done with the elderberry harvest yet.
Rightly so. It should be like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you had to learn that when something rose up, you faced it as a challenge to overcome. instead of a sign that you should go home.
Right, right.
And I think that that's having taught at the university and kind of like watched the shift in the attitude toward even having some real intellectual fortitude. There were instances where I'm reading someone's work and I would hit a place where their voice changed so much. I'm like, yeah, that's not their voice. And I'd put that paragraph into Google, and sure enough, it would pop up. I'd be like, okay, this paragraph is totally plagiarized. And
Whoa.
yeah. And I'd sit down with the student and I'd say, so what happened here? Because this is not your paragraph. And what was fascinating to me was there was none of the intellectual rigor that I remember from when I was in school. None of that kind of sense of the adventure of, I'm going to dig through the stacks, I'm going to figure something out, I'm going to see something from a new angle or in a new light. Instead it was, oh, well, it was getting late, and why should I just rewrite those words in my own words? Like that, like the
Laziness.
It's laziness, but it's beyond that, because the laziness is, I don't feel like just rewriting it. But what's beyond that is there's no intellectual curiosity. It's not, I'm diving deep into this and trying to find out, is this true? Is this right? What does this mean? I'm going to approach this from 7 angles and see which one feels right. Instead, it was, you asked me to write a paper, I'm going to throw some words on the page and get on with my life. And I think that, that's the same type of rigor, that ability to dig in and want to be rooted, want to go deeper than the surface level, right? So in order to root in, you're going to have to go around rocks. You're going to have to go through layers that might be like rocky and uncomfortable. But that's what gets you to the point where you have the emotional fortitude, the intellectual fortitude to, what the words that are actually coming to mind is to be an adult. I see a lot of people having trouble with adulting. And I think part of the problem that people are having is their roots don't run very deep. And so the first time they hit an issue, they're looking outside themselves for help, which isn't to say we shouldn't look outside ourselves for help. Asking for help is important, and it's in balance. You need to dig in enough and really try to get to the point where you know what you know and what you don't know, so you can ask for help on the things you don't know, instead of just collapsing and deciding you don't know anything.
Yeah, and sometimes we don't know anything, and that's okay too. Like I'm always saying, like in business conversations and life, like the more we can be comfortable with being uncomfortable, the better off we are, right? The faster we grow. And we gain this sort of that emotional fortitude that we're talking about. It's like I sometimes look at like my business, and I started it around a similar time as our sister company, Way of Chocolate. And sometimes the founder of that company, Lisa, we just like laugh because we're like, how are we still in business? We did not grow up like learning about business. We don't, we're actually not that great at business, but we look around, so many local companies have fallen by the wayside. And it's almost just like persistence, just never giving up, no matter how uncomfortable it gets, just kind of like you said, rooting in. It's a really helpful quality, because you can be like, I don't know what I'm doing at all.
Yeah.
But you're just going to stick in there, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think it's how you handle the, I don't know what I'm doing. Like when I hit, I don't know what I'm doing, I try to take a deep breath and slow the heck down before I like run willy-nilly off the cliff that I don't see, because I've done that. And then it's the like breaking it down. Here's where I can find this information. Here's where I can find that information. Where I see people, kind of mistakenly going I'm doing the I don't know thing, is they say, well, I don't know. Hey, Maia, So I'm going to vomit this all over you and let you handle it. That's not the adulting way of doing, I don't know. Right. And so I think that that's where that breakdown, like, because we all need to be able to know what we don't know and be able to say it. And it's what you do after that that determines whether you grow from the experience or whether you piss off your teacher. I mean, what I have been known to snippily say to people is, go ask Grandma Google. Like when you're dealing with the most surface level questions, go find that information for yourself. That's part of the intellectual fortitude piece.
Figure it out.
Yep. When you hit the point where you're like, I've gathered all this information, I cannot make it line up. I can't make it make sense. I've approached it all these different ways. Then you go to your teacher and you say, here is this basket of stuff, and here's what I'm trying to build from it, and the parts don't fit together. Can you point me in the right direction? Right? So I think that that's just, one of those places where we need to be careful. It's like, I don't know should turn you inward first, not outward. Turn it inward and say, I don't know. Okay, how can I sort this? What buckets does I don't know fit into? And then how do I figure this out? Oh, this piece is about my emotions. I've got to figure this out internally. This piece is information. I can go to the library. I can go to Google. That's gatherable. This piece is wisdom. I need my teacher for this. And you begin to see how you skate through, I don't know. I see lots of nodding. Does that resonate with how it works in your world?
Yeah, I mean, I love what you said about slowing down, and it's sort of like the leaves fall and things kind of self-select and sort, and then you know what steps to take. There's no rush. Yeah. And I mean, I relate to what you're saying 100% because of having this new building and all the challenges and different contractors and things work out and some things don't work out. And, next, and not having anything figured out, moving into the unknown with comfort, with discomfort, and just knowing it's all going to be okay. So what's the typical age group of folks who you're teaching?
I'd say 30 plus. So usually, I mean, I have women in my groups, trying to think who the oldest person is right now, like into their 70s for certain.
So this is not like a conversation where you're saying like, oh, these damn millennials, like they just can't figure it out. This is like people of all ages that you're saying there's a lack of curiosity and figure it outness.
Yeah, I see it across the board. I see this desire for someone to hand you an answer instead of to find your own answer. And it's been one of my hardest obstacles as a teacher, as an online teacher, right? Because online, we tend to work in information, right? So usually the answer to everything is to hand out more information. But what I learned being an apprentice in person is that information actually teaches you very little.
Right. Experience is more valuable. Right.
Experience is what teaches you. So when you're in a modality where the way that things usually work is that more information gets handed out. Oh, you don't know how to do this. Let me give you another, 10 pages of information. How do you get people to a place where they're encountering themselves and encountering their own wisdom? And that's been my biggest challenge as a teacher, is to find a way to activate people. The same way that my teacher would hand me a basket in the morning and say, don't come back until this is full. How do I say to someone over the airwaves, don't come back until this is full? And I've found a myriad of ways of doing that. But part of what I had to get over personally is the sense that I was letting people down, because they're used to, especially online, they say, oh, I don't know how to do this. And the teacher says, here's 10 pages of documentation. And I say, okay, So what's your first step? Great, go do it. And they're like, what? So it takes people a little while to get used to working with me because I'm demanding the same type of embodiment of physical action that an in-person teacher would demand. But I'm not there looming over you to give you the feeling that you must do it. You can close your computer and forget about me. So, I think that actually builds that inner fortitude, that the people who stick it out, who say, oh, okay, I'm going to actually go try this, begin to see what happens when they move things around in the real world.
And what are some examples of ways that you've been inspired watching your students, take an action or figure something out themselves?
The biggest inspiration for me always comes from like the 2 years down the line outcome. The person who's going back to school because she wanted to be a doctor originally, but was too scared of the sciences, and now realizes like she can do this, and she is back in undergrad. People who have stepped out of careers that weren't working for them into marriages that their family said were wrong. I think that what happens when we build the inner fortitude is the big life changes are possible. And so that's where we see, you see the results in the big thing, but the little things are where it begins. The person who's never made a tincture, who literally I'm typing in the sidebar as our teacher's teaching, and I'm like, go get a mason jar. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I'm listening. No. Stop listening. It's recorded. Go get a mason jar. Okay, whatever herbs you got in your cupboard, dump them in the mason jar. No, we're not making a perfect tincture. We're getting you over your fear of making a tincture.
Right.
Like we're just getting this done. And those moments are always fabulous because people have that big emotional breakthrough, something that they were avoiding. And then like on the other side, they're like, I can't even figure out why I was avoiding that. What? So that's always amazing. Those little moments where people go, oh, I do have intuition. Oh, I'm not scared of this. Oh, this actually isn't a big deal. And I thought it was.
It's like everything in life, right?
Yeah.
Making a tincture, buying a house, running a business, doing something you've never done before. It's kind of all like that. You just have to push through that.
Yeah. I think we have to push through our fear of failure. Mm-hmm. And maybe some of that is just failing enough times that you realize like, you know what? I've now failed 27 times. I'm still here. People still love me. I'm only a little bit bruised. Let's get up and try again.
Oh. Yeah. It's been such a joy talking to you. I know that we have to look at time, but I was wanting to ask you if you could add one last little piece of advice or recommendation, or just like in general, like the words of wisdom that you find yourself sharing with people over and over these days.
Oh, there's so many little tidbits.
Give them all to us.
Give them all.
Or whatever favorite one.
Yeah. I think I find myself over and over telling people that energy follows intention. Wherever you're putting your thoughts, that's where your energy goes. And then if you follow that up with action, like that's how you get things done, step by step. And it's more about left foot, right foot, than being a shooting star. We just show up day after day. I mean, you and I were talking earlier about you working on getting your floors done in the new building. And it seems like what a silly, mundane task. But in order for you to do the magic that you can do in that building, you've got to get the floors done. So left foot, right foot, you get the floors done. Right? And you don't let yourself get hung up on all the obstacles in the way, because there's always going to be obstacles. And then the other thing that I go back to over and over again is we live, all of us. And when I say all of us, I even mean the people who are struggling we live the way kings and queens did 1,000 years ago. You know, the chances to experience the joys of life, there are so many for us. You know, even when we're struggling, even for people who have some big struggles in their lives. If you go back in human history, a big old chunk of time, people were trying to just like stay warm enough to live through the winter. You know, they were hungry half the year. And so while our individual lives can sometimes feel really difficult, I just always, over and over again, like turn my eyes to the privilege of like having a pillow, you know, like not sleeping on straw. I'm really happy about that. There's no bed bugs in my house. That makes me super happy. You know, if we can like zoom back, I think both in time and in space, this is such a little incredible pocket of space-time to be alive.
We live in a paradise.
We do. So,
I love that.
all of you can find a little something to enjoy in your paradise today. Our job is done.
Thank you so much for being with us, Maia. Again, if you would like more of Maia and her courses and her books, her website is Maia Toll, and the spelling of her first name is MaiaToll.com. And check out the book, The Herbiary. It's really beautiful. People have commented to me coming through the office like, oh my God, this book is so beautiful.
Thank you.
It really speaks to people.
You know, I think that it's one thing to say there's magic in the daily. It's another thing to give people a book that's magical. And so I'm so thrilled that my publisher like knocked it out of the park with that.
Oh, so great. And when will the bestiary be ready?
Probably sometime in autumn of 2019.
That's fast.
Yeah, well, it's funny you say it's fast because you've done a book, so you understand. But a lot of people are like, that's slow. But it takes a long time to get all the pictures.
Anything under 2 years is fast.
Yeah. And they have this on like super speed because we want to follow up for people who are excited about the first book.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so exciting.
So, well, thank you so much. This was fabulous.
It's so fun. I can't wait to visit you in North Carolina. I hope that happens soon.
Oh yeah, please. I would love it. And if you want to do something here.
I'd love to do something there.
I'll do something. I will help you plan a something.
Okay. Deal.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks so much, Maia.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to The Flower Lounge. I'm Katie Hess, and we'll be releasing a new podcast every Wednesday. If you like what you heard, or you know someone who might be touched by our conversation, share it with them. And don't forget to subscribe. To find out what your favorite flowers mean about you, take the quiz at LOTUSWEI.com.